Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's podcast. Joining me today is Todd Hirsch, who is an economist, an author, and a speaker. And he's joining us for our launch of our new episode on Canada's podcast called Economics for Everyone, where we are going to talk to Todd about all things economics over a period of time. Thanks for joining us here today, Todd.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show, Mario.
All right, let's talk about tariffs because tariffs is what everybody's talking about these days. First of all, let's not to say dumb it down, but let's explain it for everybody in clear terms. Todd, what an actual tariff is.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea we do this because for a lot of people, if you only listen to comments from President Trump, you might be a bit confused what a tariff is and who actually pays the tariff. A tariff is a tax that is applied to your own citizens or businesses in your own country when they import goods from other countries. So it's really important to note that the tax is paid by the citizens of that country. Donald Trump, he'll sometimes talk about we're going to put a tariff on Canada or a tariff on China and they're going to pay. That's not the way it works. Our businesses pay in terms of lost sales and maybe less competitive pricing, but it is the citizens of that country applying the tariff who pay the tax on imports.
Mhm. Tell me why, in a general sense, why are tariffs brought in by governments?
Well, tariffs were really popular sort of in the early part of the 20th century, like 100 years ago, because the economic thinking at that time was that if we put a tariff on foreign imports, goods coming into our country, it will protect our own domestic industries. And it does have that effect. It does give your own domestic industries a bit of a leg up because it makes the foreign competitors less competitive because they're going to have to importers are going to have to pay more. So the general thinking 100 years ago when tariffs were really popular was let's put up these tariff barriers, let's put up these walls, let's protect our own industries at home and let's give them the advantage. And you still hear sometimes people talk about tariffs in that way. Sometimes if there is what we would call an infant industry, if a country is trying to grow from scratch, a brand new industry or an industry they haven't had, sometimes they might think about putting a tariff on to protect their own domestic industry to give them that leg up advantage. But up until fairly recently, like the last maybe 10 years, tariffs were really out of fashion. The latter half of the 20th century, we saw tariff walls come down all over the world. It was this sort of golden time of trade liberalization, big trade deals like NAFTA and the USMCA, the European Union. But now we are seeing that pendulum swinging back and swinging back pretty hard towards the greater use of tariffs.
So let's break it down to the two different, and we'll leave the discussion for now on just Canada and U.S. So when a tariff is like imposed, like it's talked about right now, and now there's a delay till March 1st. But what impact would that have, first of all, on Canada if these tariffs go through?
Well, the impact is unequivocally negative on
Yeah.
Canada. That's why, everyone in Canada, where I live, we're freaking out a little bit because if these tariffs really did go ahead, a 25% tariff on all goods that we sell to the United States and a 10% tariff on oil and gas, that would really have a negative hit on Canada's economy. I haven't done the calculations myself, but other economists, including those at the Bank of Canada, have estimated that it would wipe out anywhere between 2 and 6% of Canada's economy. So we would definitely be in a recession if these tariffs were applied, say, for an entire year.
Okay. And looking at the states, what impact the tariffs had? Like, if the states put a tariff on Canada, what
Yeah.
impact does that have on the states?
It's also unequivocally bad, especially for consumers, because American businesses that have to import Canadian goods, say, for example, lumber or oil and gas or auto parts, all of the things that we trade with the US, those US companies are going to have to pay higher price, or they're going to have to find alternatives. So they would substitute away from a Canadian producer. They would find maybe a domestic producer or a producer from somewhere else. But those other options are likely to be higher cost. That's why they buy from Canada in the first place.
Yeah.
We've got the best price, especially with our lower dollar. And then those US companies having to pay higher prices for their inputs are going to pass that on to their consumers. So everybody understands. I mean, it's pretty clear. You ask any economist, and tariffs are going to push the prices of a lot of U.S. consumer goods higher, which is something that President Trump campaigned on exactly the opposite. That he's
Yeah.
going to lower prices for consumers.
Now, let me ask you, in terms of the actual numbers and the percentage, is this a 25%? Is that an exceptionally high uh, tariff historically?
Yes. Yes, it's exceptionally high. I
Yeah.
mean, even when President Trump was campaigning, back in the fall, he was talking about a 10% universal tariff on every country. Even that was a bit eyeball popping because tariffs generally, like I said, we haven't seen too much of them in the last 50, 60 years, but tariffs are usually somewhere around maybe 2.5%. He was talking 10% tariff, and people thought that was outrageous. And then on Inauguration Day, he kind of throws out this wild, 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico. So we have not seen tariffs between Canada and the United States anywhere close to a 25% tariff since before the Second World War.
All right. So what does Canada, we've got, less than a month until the other deadline comes up. What does Canada have to do to prepare for
Yeah,
March 1st?
yeah, it's like this. What is it? The sword of Damocles? Is that the it's this execution constantly hanging over our country. We had a stay of execution on February 3rd, but yeah, now we've got 30 days to kind of scramble and organize ourselves. There was a bit of a sigh of relief, but everyone, I think, should understand this is not a permanent reprieve. This is 30 days, and then he's going to decide again. It is an absolute wild environment in which to try to make policy or business decisions. Will he, won't he, what's going to happen? But I think it's important the conversations, and this is what I see happening right now. The politicians are certainly meeting every day to try to figure out what is an appropriate response. I think businesses in Canada, they have 30 days, which isn't a lot of time, but they've got 30 days to figure out what is our plan B. How can we find other markets? Can we buy more Canadian? All of those kinds of things. Canada's response, though, has veered towards we're going to hit back as hard as we can. We don't want to do this, but we didn't start this trade war. If a trade war, in fact, happens, we're going to hit back with tariffs of our own on specific commodities that we would purchase from the United States, all intended to sort of maximize the economic pain on our US counterparts. Again, this seems very un-Canadian. We don't like hitting. We're generally nice people, but I think the political sentiment has been we have to do something. We have to fight back. We have to exert the powers we have as a trading partner with the United States. So that's been the feeling, is that if these tariffs go into place, we will reciprocate with tariffs of our own.
Now, part of this whole tariff situation, obviously the U.S. Is dealing with Mexico, also dealing with China. Now, the trade, quote unquote, trade war the U.S. is kind of launching against China. What impact does that have on Canada and China relationships?
Yeah, it could. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. So there is a 10% tariff that the United States has imposed on imports of Chinese goods. China retaliated with tariffs of 10 to 15%. So you could consider that China and the United States are now in an escalating trade war.
Hmm.
Canada, for now, we've avoided tariffs with the United States. Let's set aside that possibility for now because they could still happen. But for now, we don't have tariffs. We're not in a tariff war with the U.S. We also trade with China. Now, it could be an interesting political rock and a hard spot for Canada.
Hmm.
Because, for example, say, Canada competes with the United States for a lot of the things that we would export to China, things like energy. And we do have now a pipeline to go to the West Coast, things like oil and gas, things like food, grains and oil seeds that we would export to China. If China now says, all right, United States, you're going to put a tariff on us, we're actually going to purchase more from Canada, this could kind of this could irritate Donald Trump. And, he could say, well, China, if all you're going to do is trade more with Canada, we're going to punish Canada even more.
Hmm.
So there's going to be a lot of sort of political, pluses and minuses in the world of global trade over the next month. Uh, it would be nice if we lived in the ideal world where all these countries cooperated, where we all understood we all benefit from the free flow of goods and services and reducing tariffs. But that's not where we're moving. We're moving in the opposite direction. There's going to be a lot of political conversations about trade.
All right, and one last thing, Todd. Now, in our conversations, you mentioned that you should also talk about and this whole issue, the end of economics. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I wrote a piece and posted it on LinkedIn this week, and actually, it's kind of blowing up on social media. I called it the end of economics, and I questioned, are all of the fundamental building blocks, the conceptual tools of 20th century economics, things like the concept of comparative advantage, things like supply and demand, things like monetary theory. Have we kind of forgotten all of these things? These things in the past used to lead politicians to generally some pretty sensible policy. It's not that we got it right every single time.
Yeah.
There were lots of things that were done in particularly 80s, the trickle down economics, which is generally now been seen. That's more of a political ideology than really sound economic thinking. But generally speaking, when politicians applied basic economic thought and concepts, it led us to some pretty good policies. Fast forward to the 2020s, and it's not just Donald Trump, this is happening all around the world. Now, politicians seem to be imposing policies that kind of ignore or fly in the face of those basic building blocks of economics. Even
Mm.
the idea of tariffs. We're going to protect our own industries and try to boost our economy that way. That ignores this concept of comparative advantage, that the country that has the comparative advantage in producing that, is better off producing it and trading with other countries and importing those goods and services for which the other country has an advantage. So I penned this piece. It's getting a lot of reaction right now. But if we like it or not, we're moving in a world where some of those economic concepts are being forgotten or ignored. And like all good things, one of the comments that actually I really did like in the on LinkedIn, somebody pushed back a little bit and said, "Well, physics didn't stop when Einstein came up with his theory of relativity.
Yeah.
It changed it. So maybe there's something there. Maybe we will see some new economic concepts and new economic rules in the 21st century that maybe make sense in our global economy today that maybe we hadn't thought of in the 20th century." That's a hopeful way of thinking of it. But for now, we're seeing a lot of economic levers being pulled that ignore those basic textbook concepts.
All right, wonderful. Thanks so much, Todd, for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Mario. It's been a pleasure.
All right, that was Todd Hirsch, an economist, author, and speaker. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's podcast. Thanks for joining us today.